Hello. So now that we've started to explore agent-based modeling a little bit more, and we've gone over what the class is going to be about, let's take a step back and let's go back to discuss what an agent-based model is in the first place. But before we discuss what an agent-based model is, I think it's important to discuss what a model is. And I find this important because in many ways, understanding an agent-based model involves understanding what the point of modeling is to begin with. And this is something that many of you may have learned at some point in your careers, but it's important to kind of take a refresher and take a step back and discuss this. So I define an agent-based model as an abstracted description of a process, object, or event. And the important point here is that it's abstracted. It's not a perfect representation. It doesn't exactly match up with the real world, and the important thing is that it exaggerates certain aspects at the expense of others. So, for instance, in this particular slide, I have a picture of the Earth, and imagine that this is actually the real Earth that you're trying to model. And on one side, we have a particular projection onto a two-dimensional map of the Earth. And what that allows you to see very easily is kind of the delineation between where the Earth is land and where it's water, though of course that'd be changing in time, as you might expect. But it doesn't allow certain other aspects. For instance, it doesn't really talk about what's inside the Earth. On the right-hand side, I have an image that you might see from a traditional intro to earth science textbook or something along those lines, where we show a cutaway of the Earth and we can kind of see what the crust is and what the other aspects are. Now, neither of these models is a perfect model, right? Both of these models are wrong to some extent, and in fact, George Box, a famous statistician, had a quote to that interpretation, right? That essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. The perfect model is not the model that best represents the world around us, but instead is a model that in some ways exaggerates the aspects of the world that we're most interested in and can help us solve the problems that we're looking at. In fact, my advisor, John Holland, used to say that models are in some ways like political cartoons, right? They exaggerate and blow up certain aspects while backgrounding and hiding other aspects for you to make, so that you can concentrate on the aspects that they're trying to make a point about. So given that description of a model, right, then what is an agent-based model? Well, an agent-based model in our context is a model that's composed of agents, as you might expect. And an agent is an autonomous individual element with properties and actions in a computer simulation. So we're in most of the context we're going to talk about, at least, is in a computer simulation. And agent-based modeling is the idea that the world itself can best be modeled by using agents, an environment, and a description of agent-agent and agent-environment interactions. And the central conceit of agent-based modeling, right, is that this is one of the best ways to describe a lot of the complex systems that we see around us. Now, over here, I have some descriptions of some different types of things that we might think of agents. Now, generally, when people think of agents, they often think of humans, right, and individual humans in that context. But an agent doesn't have to be an individual human. It could be a company, for instance, in which case the agent-based model might be a model of the interactions between the different companies. It could, in fact, be a human. So in this graph right here, I actually have a screen capture of the NetLogo HIV transmission model, in which case the model is, in fact, of agents who are representing humans who might spread HIV from one to the other. Now, note, especially, there was no reason why the model had to have been built at the level of humans. It was probably appropriate for the particular purposes for which the model was being constructed, but it could have been built at the level of, say, for instance, viruses, right? In which case it would be a very different model and at a different level of resolution and would probably help you answer different questions. A model could also be a government. So here I have a representation of the Capitol Dome in Washington, D.C., right? And we could instead be modeling the interaction between governmental agents. Now, over here, I have a representation of Kim Jong-il, right? And I put Kim Jong-il up there not as an indication of what you might represent with an agent-based model, but as a representation of what it's often not useful to represent as an agent-based model. So many agent-based models try to characterize overall patterns of behavior, right? And when you have one individual who in many ways is kind of erratic, is different from the overall behavior, it's very hard to kind of predict or understand what that individual is going to do. Now, in those cases, there are other modeling approaches, such as ethnographic modeling or in-depth psychological studies that might give you better understanding. But in many cases, I suggest not using agent-based models for these. On the other hand, if you wanted to build a set of agent-based models in which you tried to understand the role of dictators and despots and something like along those lines on a more kind of generalized basis rather than for one particular individual, then agent-based modeling might very well be useful for that context.